Hello, and welcome to another episode of Unworthy History. We're going to bring you some more actual history on this channel today. Today I'm going to read another story that was originally from this book right here, Indian Depredations in Texas. It's about a man by the name of Judge James Smith. He was a judge in Austin back in the early 1840s. However, the story from this book, Indian Depredations in Texas, is pretty short, and I was actually able to find an alternative, much more extended version of the story. This comes from the Southwestern Historical Quarterly. It was published all the way back in April of 1942, and it was published by the grandson of this Judge James Smith, who we're going to read about. We're going to read about the ordeal both of the judge and of his son that occurred back in 1841, basically just north of Austin. Grandmother Angelina Smith was well content with life in the small town of Austin a little over 100 years ago. Her husband, James Smith, was the first Chief Justice of Travis County. Her town, though small, was now the capital of a great newborn republic. To add to her satisfaction, she had three of the smartest children in town, at least she thought they were. Caroline, my mother, aged 11, Fayette, who was soon to celebrate his ninth birthday in a tragic way, and Lorena, the youngest, who was just 7. How suddenly was the whole scheme of life disrupted for Angelina. On the morning of January 21st, 1841, the Chief Justice, entirely unarmed, the idea of hostile Indians never entering his mind, mounted his horse, taking his son Fayette up behind him. He rode up the river to the present site of the old Confederate home, to look out for some hogs that were rooting around in the nearby woods. He had just reached his destination when a band of 5 Comanche Indians suddenly swooped down upon him, shooting with bows and arrows and 1 or 2 guns. One arrow struck his left arm, breaking it, and continuing its course struck my uncle Fayette on the forehead. The thoroughly frightened horse became unmanageable and dashed under a live oak tree, where both the riders were swept off by an overhanging limb. The Indians ran up at once, completed the killing of Grandfather Judge Smith with bows and arrows, and took Fayette captive. As the day wore on, Angelina, unperturbed, went about her usual affairs. Was not her boy entitled to have a good time out in the woods on his birthday? But when the pair failed to return, by nightfall Angelina became thoroughly alarmed and called in some of her neighbors. The next morning a searching party found the judge's body as it had fallen. What became of the Indians? Pursuing a northwesterly direction, they had joined another 20 of their tribesmen. The next morning the group set out on their usual course to the northwest. Time meant little to them. They moved along slowly, making only 10 or 12 miles a day. For camp, they stopped near a stream if it was to be found, and for food, they lived off the country: wild turkey, rabbit, deer, and buffalo. At the end of about a month, the Indians fell in with the main body of their tribe, including a number of squaws. By this time, they were well out on the higher country. Fayette said the squaws treated him with great cruelty, throwing him into bunches of prickly pears. The object of this treatment, he afterwards learned, was to toughen him or make a good Indian out of him. In the meantime, William Smith, the brother of Grandfather James Smith, set out on horseback to look for his nephew. After several days, he met a group of Tonkawa Indians, remaining with them several weeks. They were sedentary Indians and not as violent as the Comanches. Reaching Santa Fe, William explained his mission to the alcalde and to several American traders who were in town. He then took the Santa Fe Trail, went to St. Louis, thence down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and thence back to his home in Texas. He probably passed the Comanches and his nephew somewhere in Texas, where they had been following their weary way, reaching it at the end of 3 or 4 months, the country near the Texas-New Mexico border. But this apparently futile trip served a useful purpose, as we shall see later on. Now the squaws had found a new method of discipline for their recently acquired boy, Fayette. It was to make him wade through the slush and slime and mud of a pond where the buffalo had been accustomed to come for water and to lie in to cool themselves. Fayette later declared that this was easy compared to his experiences with prickly pears. The treatment, however, was kept up until a number of sores broke out on his body, and the Indians, thinking he would never be of any use to them, started to leave him. Just at this time, however, some Mexican Comancheros appeared on the scene. Word of a captive American boy had gone from Santa Fe to Taos, some miles north, an American, Mexican, and Indian trading village. Here lived John Rowland, an American who had married a Mexican. Hearing of the American boy's plight, Mr. Rowland gave some Mexicans $60 and told them to go out and find the child. From all accounts, they were just in time. During all this time, Grandmother Angelina prayed constantly, never losing faith that she would see her son again. In school, Fayette acquired a knowledge of the 3 R's and later joined a large mercantile firm, clerking in the fall and winter and going out on the road in spring and summer. In later years, he became very prosperous as a merchant in Washington and afterwards in Navasota, and as a plantation owner in the Brazos River bottom. It was always difficult to get Fayette to talk about his adventures with the Indians, and as long as he lived, he shunned the sight of mud holes and prickly pear. So this was a story, again, straight from an account of the grandson of this poor Judge James Smith, who was struck down back in 1841, just north of Austin. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.